Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Can I eat your leftovers? The true story of a question that changed two destinies. It was a freezing winter afternoon in Manhattan. The sky, heavy and low, smothered the city in a uniform gray. A cutting wind blew down the arteries of Fifth Avenue, seeping under coats, whistling between the yellow taxis that slalomed between passers-by. Tires squealed on the icy asphalt, splashing pedestrians with melted mud mixed with salt. The sidewalks, varnished with a thin film of ice, made the less attentive stumble, while those in a hurry averted their eyes from the faces tense with cold. The shop windows offered an almost cruel contrast: golden lights, festive decorations, mannequins dressed in velvet, jewels, and promises. Behind these misty windows, scents of truffles, hot chocolate, luxury, so many aromas that didn't belong in the outside world. Through this shiny glass, one perceived a universe where winter didn't bite, where comfort was a given. In front of one of these windows, that of the restaurant Le Saverin, one of the most exclusive establishments in Manhattan, a young girl stood still. Her arms were crossed, clutching a small, yellowed plastic bag, threadbare. She wore an oversized coat, frayed at the sleeves, its zipper hanging loose, broken. Two mismatched shoes, one athletic, the other an old boot with a hole in it, covered her feet, swollen with cold. Her toes were probably blue, perhaps numb to the point of no longer responding. Her name was Sierra Morgan, and she had 14 years old. Beneath his worn clothes, his emaciated body trembled fitfully. Not just from the cold, but from fatigue, hunger, and the constant tension one feels when living on the streets, the fear of being chased away, the fear of being seen, the fear of being invisible. Orphaned since her mother died of an overdose, Sierra had learned to survive on her own. Her father? Missing for years. She had tried a juvenile center, then a shelter, then another. But the smell, the screams, the occasional blows. She had preferred to flee. Better the street than the narrow corridors where you quickly learn to keep quiet and take it all in. For 8 months, she slept wherever she could, in stairwells of abandoned buildings, under cardboard boxes in underground parking lots, or sometimes in the hallway of a subway station, when security looked the other way. She knew the opening hours of grocery stores that threw away their unsold goods, the corners where the street dogs were kinder than the people. She didn't really feel hunger anymore. Not like before. She was past that stage. Her stomach no longer screamed. It had fallen silent, as if resigned. It was no longer an ache, but an absence. A hollow sensation. A constant emptiness that she carried without complaint. Alone his eyes still spoke. They were scanning the inside of the restaurant as one watches a dream scene from the edge of a precipice. Inside, men in suits and women in dresses drank red wine from crystal glasses. Couples laughed softly. Elegant waiters glided silently between the tables, carrying plates decorated like works of art. Piano music drifted faintly through the walls, like a lullaby for the rich. Sierra didn't even envy. She was just observing. Like one might observe another world. She knew very well that these people didn't see those like her. Or, if they did, it was like a stain to be erased. But that day, she hadn't come to be seen. She was hungry. At a central table, slightly set back from the rest of the room, a man of austere appearance was enjoying alone a refined dish placed before him. The subdued light of the crystal chandeliers made the silver reflections of his silk tie shine. He wore a tailor-made charcoal gray suit, cut by an Italian tailor few people knew, but who was fiercely sought after by New York's elite. His platinum watch shimmered subtly on his left wrist, a unique model, handmade in Switzerland, sans logo apparent. The plate in front of him, a Wagyu fillet on a bed of truffled celery mousse, was worth almost $150. He had barely eaten a few bites. His attention was not on his plate, nor even on the hushed atmosphere of the restaurant. He stared distractedly at the screen of his phone, where figures, stock market curves, notifications from Bloomberg and CNBC scrolled by. Matthew Hargrove, 46 years old, founder and CEO of Hargrove Capital, was one of the titans of Wall Street, a private equity legend, nicknamed by some, the architect of disruption. His specialty, buying up moribund companies, laying off employees with axe tools, restructuring with millions, and emerging with astronomical profits. He had a reputation ruthless, cold, incapable of compromise, a man for whom emotions were distractions, and pity a strategic weakness. But what few people knew was that Matthew was not born in marble. He had grown up in a dilapidated mobile home, in a forgotten corner of Ohio. His mother, a cashier, worked nights. His father, an alcoholic, had disappeared when he was 11. He had spent his adolescence selling newspapers in the morning and stacking crates in a convenience store at night. He had never had new toys. No Christmases with a tree. No vacations. And yet, he had held on. He had studied furiously. Got into a university on a scholarship. Worked 3 times harder than everyone else. Then, in New York, he had conquered everything. But in exchange, he had closed the door on his past. For him, success was a war, and those who failed simply fell down and never got up again. He had no compassion for those who asked for help. He was never returned to his native neighborhood, and had no news from anyone. It was his pride, to have escaped from poverty be the sheer force of his will. He didn't tolerate weakness. Not in others. Not in himself. So when the waiter quietly approached his table with a hesitant tone, Matthew barely looked up. "Excuse me, Mr. Hargrove." "Yes," he replied, without leaving his screen. "There's a young girl outside. She's been looking at you for a while." Matthew raised an eyebrow, looking distracted. "And?" The waiter swallowed. "She didn't ask for anything. Nothing, except if she could eat your leftovers." An icy silence fell. Slowly, Matthew looked up. The waiter hesitated to continue. "She didn't want to bother me. She said to me, 'Tell him I don't want the money. Just the leftovers.' She looks very young. And frozen." Matthew didn't answer right away. He slowly put down his phone, as if the words had just brought him out of an abstract dream, one of numbers, algorithms, profits. He inhaled slowly, expressionless. "My leftovers?" "Yes, sir." A sort of barely perceptible annoyance crossed his gaze. He didn't like interruptions. And even less the intrusions of reality, the one he had spent his life running away from. But a part of him, tiny, distant, forgotten, was stung. Perhaps because he knew what it was like to be hungry. Or perhaps because he'd never been asked like this. Without saying a word, he turned his head towards the large bay window, slightly misted by the interior heat. And there, their eyes met. She was there, behind the glass. Sierra Morgan, a small, frail figure, her cheeks reddened by the cold, her arms clutched tightly to her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She didn't seem ashamed or aggressive. She wasn't pleading, she looked. With strength. With dignity. With that calm intensity sometimes possessed by those who no longer expect anything from anyone. Matthew held that gaze for a second, 2 seconds, and something inside him, a vestige of humanity buried beneath years of cynicism, if crack. He stood up slowly, put his napkin back on the table, and then addressed the waiter in a neutral but firm tone. "Tell the boss to stay open." The waiter, surprised, nodded. "I'll let her in." The conversations, usually hushed and worldly, froze as if frozen in ice when Matthew Hargrove crosses the threshold of the main room again Savrin. But this time, he was not alone. Behind him walked a fragile figure, curled up in a threadbare coat that hung over her shoulders like an ambulance blanket. Sierra Morgan, barefoot in her mismatched shoes, moved slowly, as if she were walking through a dream. Her steps were hesitant, as if each shiny marble tile were judging her. The warm interior of the restaurant, bathed in gold and delicate scents, contrasted violently with the dirt that clung to his skin and clothes. An eerie silence fell over the room, the fork stopped halfway through, suspended between mouth and plate. Sideways glances crossed. Some customers looked away, embarrassed. Others whispered behind their napkins, between annoyance and indignation. What is she doing here? They let her into a place like this? Is this a joke? The butler, an elegant man with a thin mustache and a perfectly tailored suit, instinctively stepped forward to block the path. But Matthew, without raising his voice, cut him off sharply. She is having dinner with me. A single glance from the billionaire is enough to silence any attempt at protest. A waiter hesitated, his hands clutching a tray of champagne. The chef, backstage, was alerted by the waitstaff's earpiece. The mood changed. Sierra's presence acted like a mirror, projecting into this room of privileged people something that they did everything to forget: misery, pain, reality. Matthew sat impassively, as if he had just done something perfectly natural. He invited the girl to sit opposite him, at his own table, the one that management usually reserved for diplomats, stars, businessmen from the Middle East or Zurich. Sierra, intimidated, stood for a second. His eyes were lowered, but she perceived that Matthew's gaze was not mocking. Nor was it warm, but he was human. And it was already huge. She sat down slowly. Her back barely touched the backrest. His hands were shaking, not only from the cold, but from the effort to hold back her unease, her desire to disappear, her fear of being dismissed with a word. Matthew then addressed the waiter. "Serve him whatever's hottest you have, as soon as possible. And a hot chocolate. With whipped cream." The waiter nodded, visibly confused. Then he left. Sierra still didn't dare speak. She kept her eyes fixed on the white tablecloth, too white. She didn't even dare touch the glass of water in front of her. His fingers were dirty. His heart was beating too fast. She wondered if this was all real or if she would soon wake up in the backyard of an apartment building. A few minutes later, a tray arrived. "Here you go, sir." A piping hot soup, toast with herb butter, chicken supreme, celery puree. And chocolate. Sierra felt tears well up in her eyes, but she held them back. She clasped her hands for a moment, as if to offer inward thanks, then began to eat. Slowly, with surprising mastery. Every bite was a blessing, but she didn't throw herself at the food. No. She knew hunger, but she knew even better the fear of losing what you are given. Eating quickly meant risking spoiling everything, having a stomach ache, looking animalistic, and being rejected immediately. Matthew watched him. And for the first time in years, he was not looking at a screen. He wasn't thinking about a merger, an acquisition, a yield curve. He watched a child eat. There was something in his gestures, in his calm, in his restraint, a disarming dignity. No complaints. No drama. Just a presence. Just a life that held on. He didn't understand what he felt. He felt strangely uncomfortable. Not because she was dirty or poor, but because it awakened something deeply buried in him. A memory. A cold night. He, a little boy, sat in front of an empty plate, while his mother cried in the bathroom. He shook his head gently, as if to chase away the ghost. And then, he broke the silence. His voice was softer than usual, almost cautious. "Where are your parents?" Matthew asked, his voice lower, almost choked with an emotion he couldn't explain. The girl shrugged her shoulders slightly, as if the answer weighed too much to say aloud. "Death." A silence. "My father. I don't know. He never came back." She didn't need to elaborate. This, "never returned," was an abyss. Abandonment doesn't need long speeches. It leaves hollows under the eyes and in the heart. Matthew pursed his lips slightly. He looked at his half-full glass. He could have said something polite or changed the subject, but he persisted. "Where do you sleep?" "It depends." She took a bite of bread, almost mechanically. "I try not to stay in one place. Sometimes in a laundromat. Once in a movie theater before they kick me out. Sometimes behind a yoga center. There are hot grills." Matthew froze. He, who owned entire buildings heated empty for absent investors, was discovering that this child was hunting down air vents to keep from freezing. "Are you going to school?" He already knew the answer, but he had to hear it. I was going. But I couldn't continue. I had no more clothes, no more address. I was afraid they'd catch me. Do you want to continue? She finally looked up. They were dark but intense. And what he saw in them wasn't a complaint. Not a request. It was a wish, a fire. I want to learn. A break. So that my life doesn't stay like this. That sentence. Simple. But cutting. It stuck in Matthew's chest like an arrow. He'd always thought the poor were complacent. But this girl, she held a resolve in her eyes that even his most brilliant analysts lacked. A long silence fell. All that could be heard in the room was the clinking of cutlery and the hushed murmurs of other customers watching them out of the corner of their eyes. Matthew put down his napkin. He asked for the bill, without another word. When the waiter walked away, Matthew stared at her. Sierra, confused, thought it was over. That she'd be shown the door, or maybe given a few bills. That was plenty. But instead, Matthew's voice changed. It lost its dryness. He said softly, almost coyly. 1. She looked at him, her brows furrowed. You're going to sleep at a hotel tonight. I have an empty suite. Heated. You'll be alone. No one will bother you. Sierra didn't move right away. Natural distrust. She had seen too many lying faces, too many empty promises. But there was a strange gravity in this man's eyes. No pity. No games. Just a cold certainty, tonight you sleep warm. She nodded slowly. So, for the first time in years, Sierra followed an adult without fear. And Matthew, for the first time in decades, opened a door without thinking about what it would cost him. That night, Sierra slept in a huge, unreal soft bed. White sheets, soft cushions, gentle warmth caressing her numb skin. She lay there for a long time without moving, as if afraid of disturbing this dream too beautiful to last. Then, slowly, she let herself go. She hugged a pillow to her as if it were a lost comfort blanket from childhood. And for the first time in years, she cried. Not from cold, nor from fear. But from relief. Her silent tears streamed down her cheeks as she fell asleep, lulled by a forgotten sensation, security. In the early morning, the dim light filtered through the thick curtains. Sierra stood up slowly, her feet still hesitant on the thick carpet. A tray awaited her on the coffee table, fresh orange juice, buttered toast, scrambled eggs, sliced fruit. She didn't dare touch it. When Matthew entered, dressed in a plain suit, he smiled slightly at the sight of her awake. But he was not alone. Waiting in the suite's living room were a lawyer with a reassuring face and a social worker in her 50s with a gentle but watchful gaze. Matthew had contacted them at dawn. He had spent part of the night making calls, mobilizing his most reliable contacts, those he trusted, a rare thing for a man who had built his fortune by distrusting everyone. The meeting was cautious. Sierra, wary, answered questions gently. She observed everything. But little by little, she understood that this time, no one wanted to hurt her. Within days, and after several checks by social services, an exceptional measure was taken. Sierra was placed under the temporary guardianship of Matthew Hargrove, a man none of them had imagined would open his heart. But he had, with a calm, almost unsettling determination. He hired a private tutor who specialized in helping children who had dropped out of school reintegrate. A warm woman with a passion for literature, she treated Sierra not as a broken student, but as a pearl being slowly polished. Then he contacted a renowned, discreet therapist who was used to working with young people who had suffered trauma. Sierra went once, then twice, then every week, without being forced to. Matthew also opened a savings account in her name. He put a substantial amount into it, not to buy her, but because he wanted her to have something of her own, a safety net that he himself had never had as a child. What was supposed to be temporary, quickly became obvious. 3 months later, one spring morning, in a hushed office of New York's family court, Matthew signed the adoption papers. Sierra did too, in a mixture of shock and disbelief. Her name changed. She was now called Sierra Morgan Hargrove, but beyond the name, she had found a home. And a reason. Because Matthew changed. The ruthless, solitary, sometimes cold businessman began to smile more often. He came home earlier. He sat down at the table with her. He listened to her talk about her reading, her dreams, her nightmares too. She fearlessly questioned him about his life, his past, what he really wanted. And he answered. Not like he did to his shareholders, but with sincerity. Through her, he discovered a tenderness he thought was absent from her nature. He saw her rebuilding herself, and in that rebuilding, he was repairing himself too. Sierra wasn't filling a void, she was revealing what Matthew had always suppressed, his capacity to love. She became his light. And he became what no man had ever been to her, a guide, a pillar, a family. 10 years later. The ceiling of the Brooklyn Conservatory Hall's great hall shone brightly. Hanging crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the white-clothed tables, where prominent figures from the legal, political, and community sectors were gathered. It was a benefit gala for homeless youth, an evening of elegance and commitment, moving speeches and quiet fundraising. On stage, the spotlights came on softly, bathing the stage in a dim light. A 24-year-old woman strode confidently onto the stage. Her simple, elegant midnight blue dress contrasted with the quiet power emanating from her. Her hair, carefully smoothed, fell over her shoulders like a declaration of calm after the storm. She wore a simple badge, Sierra M. Hargrove, lawyer, children's rights attorney. A respectful murmur rippled through the room. Many knew his name, few knew his story. She took a deep breath, then walked over to the microphone. "Good evening," she said in a clear voice, slightly shaky at first, but full of conviction. "My name is Sierra." There was silence. People were listening to him. "I lived on the streets for several months. I slept under bridges, in stairwells, in abandoned subway stations. I knew fear. Hunger. Indifference." She paused, scanning the room. "And one day, I dared to do what no one dares. I asked a stranger if I could eat his leftovers. It was in a restaurant, on a rainy evening, and I was invisible to the world. But he saw me." His eyes briefly clouded with emotion. "What I received that night wasn't just a meal. It was a second chance. A real one. He didn't just feed me. He listened to me. He protected me. He believed in me when I couldn't do it myself." She took a deeper breath, then continued with renewed strength. "Today, I'm a lawyer. I defend the rights of children and adolescents without family, without a voice, without a roof over their heads. Because I know what it's like to be forgotten. And I swore to myself that never again would a child beg to eat a stranger's leftovers." In the room, a man sitting in the front row bowed his head. It was Matthew Hargrove. The feared former CEO of Hargrove Global, an investment magnate often described by the press as ruthless and cold. But tonight, his eyes were red. A tear slid down his cheek, which he discreetly wiped away with his fingertips. Around him, some had recognized him. They didn't yet understand everything. But he knew. He knew that this young woman had shattered within him what neither markets, nor failures, nor crises had managed to shake, his solitude. Sierra looked up at him for a moment, just one. A silent look, but one filled with gratitude and love. Later, as the gala drew to a close, a reporter approached Matthew, still emotional, and asked him this banal question that evening, took on immense resonance. "Mr. Hargrove, what changed everything for you?" Matthew smiled, a tired but genuine smile. He stared at the large, empty stage for a moment, then replied in a deep voice. "A hungry kid. And 7 words that pulverized my ivory tower. Can I eat your leftovers, sir?" He fell silent, his gaze lost in his memories. And in that silence, we understood that this was not just the story of a rich man and a poor child. It was the story of a world changed by an act of humanity.